Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if learning new words is easier when you hear them in the same old stories, or when they pop up in all sorts of different places? Well, today we're diving into some fascinating new research that explores just that, and it might surprise you. This study is all about something called contextual diversity. Think about it like this. When you learn a new word, do you learn it better if you encounter it in the exact same kind of situation over and over? Or if it shows up in a bunch of totally different situations? This research asks how that word learning process works, especially when we're learning new words for the very first time. So the big question here is whether learning words in different, varied situations, what they call high diversity contexts, actually messes with your ability to remember what that word means later on. And they also wanted to figure out when this might happen. Does it mess things up right at the beginning, or is it more about remembering later? They did 2 experiments to find out. In experiment 1, they had a bunch of adults read stories with made-up words. Some people read these stories all in one consistent narrative. That is the low diversity group. Others read them across 9 different stories. That is the high diversity group. And they did this over 3 days to give people more time to learn. They wanted to see if more learning time would actually make the diverse contexts helpful, like the lexical legacy hypothesis suggests. Now, for remembering the actual word spellings, it turned out that whether they learned in high diversity or low diversity contexts didn't make much of a difference. The Bayes factor, which is like a statistical tool to weigh the evidence for or against a finding, actually gave moderate to strong evidence for a null effect, meaning no real difference. Basically, for recalling the spelling of the new words, it was pretty much the same whether the stories were all the same or super varied, and the same went for recognizing the word forms. Participants were really good at recognizing the word forms they'd seen, and again, there was no significant difference between the diverse and non-diverse learning groups. The Bayes factor here showed moderate evidence for a null effect, but here is where things get interesting. When it came to remembering the meaning of the words, that is a different story. They found that people remembered significantly more of the word meanings when they learned them in the low diversity or same narrative condition. This meant that learning in a single coherent story actually helped people remember more of the word's features than learning it across 9 different stories. The Bayes factor here showed extreme evidence for this effect. It really repeated what a previous study had found, that learning meanings in diverse contexts can be a disadvantage. Interestingly, people also rated their comprehension as higher in the low diversity condition. This suggests that maybe when the stories are more connected, it is just easier to follow along and grasp the new concepts. So experiment 1 showed that even with more learning time, diverse contexts still seem to make it harder to recall word meanings. Now, experiment 2 wanted to dig deeper into why this happens. Does diversity mess up the initial learning, or does it just make it harder to get the information out later when you are asked to recall it? They used a different way to test word form learning, a speeded recognition task. It is kind of like a quick yes or no, have you seen this word? Test, and again, they found no significant effect of diversity on either accuracy or how quickly people responded. So, for word forms, diversity just doesn't seem to be a big factor in learning. But what about word meanings? This time, they used a semantic feature recognition task. Instead of asking people to recall all the features, they presented them with a feature and asked if it was true or false for the word. This is supposed to reduce the recall demand, meaning it is easier to access the information. And here is the crucial part. Even though the task was easier, they found no significant effect of contextual diversity on recognizing the semantic features. The Bayes factor showed moderate evidence for a null effect. So, what does all of this mean? The study suggests that contextual diversity doesn't really affect how well we learn the form of a new word, like its spelling. For word meanings, however, it gets more complicated. While diversity doesn't seem to impact whether you can recognize a semantic feature when it is presented to you, as shown in experiment 2. It does seem to make it harder to recall those features when you have to generate them yourself, especially in the early stages of learning, as shown in experiment 1. The researchers think that learning in a low diversity context builds a more coherent, connected representation of the new word's meaning. This strong connection acts like a helpful reminder, making it easier to pull out all the related details when you are asked to recall them. In contrast, learning in diverse contexts might create more separate, weaker memories, making it harder to connect all the dots when you need to recall them. It is like having all your notes scattered in different folders versus having them neatly organized in one binder. However, the study does have some limitations. The words they used were made up concrete nouns. It might be different for more abstract words or verbs, where meaning is often more tied to context. Also, the learning period, even though extended to 3 days, is still much shorter than a lifetime of learning. Ultimately, this research tells us that word learning isn't just about memorizing definitions in isolation. It is deeply tied to how we understand and build representations of the stories and conversations we experience. The way we encounter words, and the diversity of those encounters, really shapes how well we can access and use that knowledge later on. It seems like for the very early stages of learning, a consistent, coherent context might be more beneficial for building those foundational meaning representations. This is a really cool peek into how our brains build new vocabulary. It highlights that context is king, not just for understanding what words mean, but for remembering them too. What do you all think? Have you ever found it easier to learn something new when it is presented in a consistent way? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the science of learning, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more brainy content, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching.